Jake Sullivan felt the heat hit his face as the transport ship's doors opened above the desert planet. The red sand below looked like an ocean of fire, stretching as far as he could see. Beside him, Lisa Martinez checked her rifle one more time while Ryan Clark counted his explosive charges. Amy Foster was busy with her medical kit, making sure everything was ready for what was coming. The galactic announcer's voice boomed across all frequencies, reaching billions of viewers across the galaxy. Today was Day 6 of the Ruthless Invitational. Season 11, and only the best teams had made it this far. 13 teams would drop onto Kepler 442c, but only one would survive to claim victory. The humans had shocked everyone by making it to the playoffs, and now alien species across the galaxy were watching to see if Earth's warriors could prove themselves worthy. Jake looked at his team one last time before the jump. They were the underdogs, the newcomers, the species that most aliens thought got lucky in the early rounds. The Zephyrians, with their thick scales and poison claws, had been tournament champions twice before. The Hive Collective could coordinate hundreds of drone warriors with perfect timing. The Luminari could turn pure energy into deadly weapons with just a thought. Compared to these evolved killing machines, humans seemed weak and primitive, but Jake knew something the aliens didn't understand. Humans had been fighting wars on Earth for thousands of years, learning lessons that no amount of genetic enhancement could teach. They knew how to adapt, how to survive, and how to win against impossible odds. The jump signal flashed green and Jake leaped from the transport, his team following close behind. The wind roared in his ears as they fell toward the planet's surface, their parachutes deploying automatically at the right altitude. Below them, other teams were landing in different areas of the combat zone, each group hoping to find weapons and supplies before the real fighting began. They landed hard on a rocky ridge overlooking a vast canyon. The planet's twin suns beat down mercilessly, and Jake could already feel sweat forming under his combat gear. The gravity here was slightly heavier than Earth's, making every movement take a little more effort. But humans were used to harsh conditions, and they quickly adapted to their new environment. Amy immediately began setting up a communication system, while Lisa found a good spot to watch for enemy movement. Ryan started checking the area for useful materials, his engineer's mind already thinking about how to turn rocks and sand into defensive positions. Jake studied the terrain, looking for advantages they could use against their superhuman opponents. The tournament rules were simple but deadly. A slowly shrinking energy barrier would force all teams toward the center of the combat zone over the next several hours. Anyone caught outside the barrier would be disintegrated instantly. Teams could find weapons and equipment scattered across the battlefield, but most would have to rely on what they brought with them. The last team standing would advance to the next round. Through her scope, Lisa spotted movement in the canyon below. A group of 6 Zephyrians was moving through the rocky terrain, their reptilian forms blending well with the red stone. They moved with the confidence of natural predators, their clawed feet finding easy purchase on surfaces that would challenge most species. These were not opponents to take lightly. Jake made quick hand signals to his team, a communication method that required no technology and couldn't be intercepted. The Zephyrians were heading toward a supply cache that had been dropped near the canyon floor, probably hoping to claim better weapons before other teams arrived. It was a logical strategy, but it would also make them vulnerable for a few crucial minutes. The human team moved down the ridge silently, using every piece of cover they could find. Jake had studied recordings of previous tournaments, learning how each alien species fought and what weaknesses they might have. Zephyrians were strong and fast, but they relied heavily on their natural weapons and superior physical abilities. They weren't used to fighting enemies who used cunning instead of brute force. Lisa found a shooting position, about 200 meters from the supply cache, well within range of her modified rifle. The weapon looked primitive compared to alien energy guns, but it fired solid projectiles that could punch through most armor and didn't rely on power cells that could fail at crucial moments. Ryan and Amy circled around to the other side of the canyon, carrying explosive charges that could bring down rock walls if needed. the Zephyrians reached the supply cache and began searching through the equipment, their attention focused on finding the most powerful weapons available. They had no idea that 4 humans were watching their every move, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. This was exactly the kind of overconfidence that Jake had hoped to exploit. Jake's hand signal started the attack. Lisa's first shot took out the Zephyrian leader before he could even turn around, the bullet finding the weak spot where his neck scales didn't quite overlap. The others spun toward the sound of gunfire, but Ryan's explosives were already bringing down the canyon wall behind them, cutting off their escape route and filling the air with dust and debris. In the confusion, Amy appeared from an unexpected angle, her medical knowledge helping her target the aliens' vital organs with surgical precision. The Zephyrians tried to use their speed and claws to overwhelm the humans, but Jake had planned for this. Every move they made had been predicted and countered before the fight even began. The battle was over in less than 3 minutes. 6 of the galaxy's most feared warriors lay dead in the red sand, defeated by 4 humans with basic weapons and superior tactics. Across the galaxy, billions of viewers sat in stunned silence, trying to understand what they had just witnessed. Jake collected the Zephyrians' equipment while his team prepared to move to a new position. The energy barrier was already beginning to shrink, and other teams would be converging on the center of the combat zone soon. But for the first time since the tournament began, Jake felt confident about their chances. The aliens might have better technology and stronger bodies, but humans had something much more valuable: the ability to think like warriors instead of just fighting like animals. The energy barrier crackled behind them as Jake's team moved deeper into the planet's crystal formations. The ancient structures rose from the desert like frozen lightning, their surfaces reflecting the harsh sunlight in ways that hurt to look at directly. Amy had studied the geological data during their descent and explained that these crystals were millions of years old, formed by some long-dead civilization that had once called this world home. Lisa adjusted her rifle's scope as they climbed higher into the crystal maze. The formations created perfect sniper positions, but they also provided countless hiding places for enemies. Through her enhanced optics, she could see heat signatures moving through the lower levels of the crystal field. 2 different groups were approaching their position, and neither looked human. Jake recognized the movement patterns immediately from his tournament research. The first group moved in perfect coordination, like parts of a single organism thinking with one mind. These were warriors from the Hive Collective, a species that had evolved beyond individual consciousness into something that resembled a living computer network. Each drone could share information instantly with every other member of their group, making them incredibly difficult to ambush or outmaneuver. The second group moved differently, their forms seeming to shift and blur as they approached. The Luminari were beings of pure energy who had learned to take physical form only when they needed to interact with solid matter. They could pass through most barriers, manipulate electromagnetic fields, and turn their own bodies into weapons of devastating power. In previous tournaments, they had won by simply overwhelming their opponents with energy attacks that could melt through any known armor. Ryan was already placing explosive charges at key points in the crystal structure, his demolitions expertise telling him exactly where to create the most effective barriers and choke points. But Jake knew that conventional tactics wouldn't work against either of these enemy groups. The Hive Collective would adapt to any strategy they tried more than once, and the Luminari could probably ignore most physical obstacles entirely. Amy was monitoring both groups through her portable scanner, tracking their energy signatures as they moved through the crystals below. The Hive drones were spreading out in a classic encirclement pattern, while the Luminari seemed to be moving directly toward their position with no attempt at stealth. Both approaches made sense given each species' abilities, but they also revealed potential weaknesses that a clever tactician might exploit. Jake made his decision quickly, using hand signals to split his team into 2 groups. Lisa would remain in the upper crystals with her rifle, providing covering fire and taking out high-value targets when opportunities presented themselves. Jake would descend to ground level and engage the Hive Collective directly, using their coordination against them. Ryan and Amy would focus on the Luminari, trying to find ways to disrupt their energy forms using the unique properties of the crystal formations. The hive drones reached the base of the crystal structure first, their insectoid forms moving with mechanical precision as they began to climb. There were 12 of them, each one armed with biomechanical weapons that could adapt to different combat situations. They communicated through high-frequency sound waves that human ears couldn't detect, but Jake had brought equipment that could interfere with those signals. Jake activated the sonic disruptor that Amy had modified from captured alien technology, sending chaotic noise across the frequencies the hive used for communication. The effect was immediate and devastating. Drones that had been moving in perfect formation suddenly stumbled and collided with each other. Their shared consciousness fragmented by the electronic interference. Lisa's rifle cracked from above, and the lead hive drone's head exploded in a shower of biological components. Without their network to guide them, the remaining drones began making individual decisions, and Jake quickly realized that they were much less dangerous when fighting as separate units rather than as parts of a collective mind. Meanwhile, the Luminari had reached the crystal formations and were beginning to phase through the solid matter like ghosts. Ryan's explosives were useless against enemies who could simply ignore physical barriers. But Amy had discovered something interesting about the crystals themselves. They seemed to resonate with certain energy frequencies, and when she adjusted her medical scanner to match those frequencies, the crystals began to glow with their own internal light. The first Luminari warrior emerged from a crystal wall directly in front of Amy, its energy form blazing with power as it prepared to strike. But as soon as it came into contact with the glowing crystal, something unexpected happened. The alien's energy form became solid, trapped in physical matter that it could no longer phase through. Amy had discovered that the crystals could force energy beings to maintain solid form, turning the Luminari's greatest advantage into a vulnerability. Ryan immediately began placing explosive charges around the glowing crystals, creating traps that would force any Luminari who came near them to become solid targets. The remaining energy beings tried to avoid the crystal field, but this limited their movement options and made them predictable. Lisa was able to target them with her rifle, her solid projectiles proving effective against enemies who were no longer able to shift into pure energy. The battle raged through the crystal formations for nearly an hour, with Jake's team using every advantage they could find. The sonic disruptor kept the hive drones confused and disorganized, while the resonating crystals neutralized the Luminari's energy manipulation abilities. Lisa's marksmanship and Ryan's explosives eliminated enemies who had expected to face primitive weapons with advanced technology. When the fighting finally ended, the crystal field was littered with the remains of both alien teams. The hive drones lay scattered among the formations, their biomechanical components sparking and twitching as their network connection finally died completely. The Luminari had been forced into solid form and then destroyed by conventional weapons, their energy signatures fading into nothing as their physical bodies failed. Jake gathered his team among the crystals, checking their ammunition and equipment, while Amy treated minor injuries they had sustained during the fight. The energy barrier was continuing to shrink, and they could see other teams in the distance moving toward the center of the combat zone. But they had eliminated two of the most dangerous opponents in the tournament, and their confidence was growing with each victory. Through her scope, Lisa could see that only 6 teams remained active in the tournament. The humans had gone from being considered hopeless underdogs to being genuine contenders for the championship. Across the galaxy, alien commentators were struggling to explain how a primitive species with basic weapons could defeat opponents who were theoretically superior in every measurable way, but Jake understood what the aliens didn't. Humans had learned to fight wars not just with strength or speed or advanced technology, but with intelligence and adaptability and the willingness to find unexpected solutions to impossible problems. Every victory was teaching them more about their opponent's weaknesses, and every battle was proving that the human way of fighting could overcome even the most advanced alien warriors. The ancient temple rose from the planet's surface like a monument to some forgotten god, its black stone walls covered in symbols that hurt to look at for too long. Jake led his team through the massive entrance, their footsteps echoing in chambers that had been empty for thousands of years. The energy barrier had shrunk again, forcing the remaining teams toward this central location where the tournament's final battles would be decided. Amy's scanner showed energy readings throughout the temple that defied explanation, with power sources that seemed to draw energy from dimensions that human science couldn't identify. The walls themselves were made from materials that their equipment couldn't analyze, and the air inside felt thick with ancient power that made every breath taste like metal and electricity. Lisa found a defensive position near the entrance while Ryan began examining the temple's architecture for potential demolition points. But Jake was more interested in the strange technology they had discovered in the inner chambers, devices that looked like they had been waiting for someone to activate them for millions of years. The temple's previous occupants had been builders, on a scale that dwarfed any known civilization, creating structures that could manipulate space and time itself. Most of the alien teams that had reached this point in previous tournaments had been too afraid to explore the temple's deeper levels, preferring to fight in the outer chambers where the ancient technology couldn't interfere with their weapons and abilities. But Jake's team had learned that the things other species feared often contained the keys to victory. Amy was already working to understand the temple's control systems, her medical training giving her insights into technology that seemed to respond to biological impulses rather than mechanical commands. The ancient builders had created machines that worked with living beings instead of replacing them, a philosophy that seemed almost human in its approach. Through the temple's corridors came a sound that made Jake's blood freeze in his veins, a whisper of movement that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. The Void Stalkers had found them, and these were opponents that had won the tournament 3 times in the past by killing every other team without ever being seen clearly enough to understand how they fought. Lisa's scope couldn't lock onto targets that seemed to exist between dimensions, shifting in and out of reality like living shadows that had learned to hunt. The Void Stalkers could phase through solid matter at will, becoming incorporeal when attacked and then materializing just long enough to strike with weapons that could cut through any known armor. They were the tournament's most feared opponents, and no team had ever survived a direct confrontation with them. Jake realized that conventional fighting tactics would be useless against enemies who could ignore physical laws whenever it suited them. But the temple around them was filled with technology that operated on principles beyond normal physics, and Amy was beginning to understand how some of the ancient systems responded to human neural patterns in ways that seemed impossible. The first Void Stalker attack came without warning. A blade of pure darkness that passed through the stone wall beside Jake's head and nearly took his ear off. The creature materialized for just a moment, long enough for him to see glowing eyes and a face that seemed to be made of living shadow, before it faded back into whatever dimension it called home. Ryan's explosives were useless against enemies that could become intangible at will, and Lisa's rifle couldn't target opponents that existed in multiple dimensions simultaneously. But Jake remembered stories from Earth's mythology about creatures that could only be harmed by specific methods, legends that had been passed down through human culture for thousands of years. Amy discovered that the temple's lighting systems could be activated through direct neural interface, responding to human thought patterns in ways that the original builders had programmed into their technology. When she activated the ancient lights, the entire chamber blazed with illumination that seemed to come from every surface at once, and the Voidstalker's shadows suddenly became visible as dark shapes moving against the brilliant background. Jake realized that the creatures were not truly incorporeal but were instead using advanced technology to shift between dimensions, and the temple's lighting systems were designed to work across multiple dimensional planes simultaneously. The ancient builders had faced similar enemies and had created defenses that could track and target beings that existed in spaces between normal reality. Lisa quickly adapted her rifle with crystal components they had gathered from the previous battlefield, creating ammunition that could exist in multiple dimensions just like the temple's lighting systems. Her first shot struck a void stalker that had been trying to approach from what it thought was an invisible angle, and the creature's scream echoed across frequencies that human ears couldn't normally detect. Ryan used his demolitions expertise to collapse portions of the temple in calculated ways, creating barriers of rubble and debris that existed across multiple dimensional planes. The Void Stalkers found their movement options limited as Jake's team turned the temple itself into a weapon against them, using the ancient technology to fight enemies that had never been defeated by conventional means. The battle moved through the temple's corridors like a three-dimensional chess game, with the humans using every advantage they could find while the Void Stalkers tried to use their dimensional abilities to outmaneuver their opponents. But Amy had gained access to the temple's central control systems, and she was learning to manipulate the ancient technology in ways that even its original builders might not have imagined. Jake coordinated his team's movements through hand signals and tactical awareness that had been honed through years of military training on Earth. They fought like a single organism with 4 different, specialized functions, each member contributing their unique skills to the overall strategy while adapting to threats that no human had ever faced before. The final Void Stalker made its attack from above, dropping through the temple's ceiling in an attempt to strike Jake directly. But Amy had programmed the ancient defenses to respond to her team's neural patterns, and the temple's weapon systems activated automatically, creating a cage of energy that trapped the creature in normal space where it could be damaged by conventional weapons. Lisa's shot took the Void Stalker through what might have been its heart, and the creature collapsed into a pool of shadow that gradually faded into nothing. The temple fell silent except for the sound of the humans breathing and the distant hum of ancient machinery that was still running after millions of years. Ryan had been injured during the final battle, his leg torn by a Void Stalker blade that had partially materialized inside his body before Amy could activate the temple's defenses. But he was alive and their team was intact, and they had accomplished something that no other species in the tournament's history had ever managed. Jake looked around at the temple's ancient chambers and realized that they had not just defeated the Void Stalkers but had also gained access to technology that could change the balance of power in the galaxy. The temple systems responded to human thought patterns in ways that suggested the original builders had shared certain characteristics with Earth's people, creating machines that enhanced natural abilities rather than replacing them with artificial substitutes. The transport beam lifted Jake's team from the temple ruins and deposited them aboard a massive space station that orbited high above the planet's surface. The structure was ancient beyond measure, its corridors filled with technology from a dozen different civilizations that had used this facility for tournaments spanning thousands of years. But now the station was dying, its systems failing one by one as competing energy sources tore the structure apart from within. Jake helped Ryan walk through the station's corridors, his teammate's leg wound making movement difficult in the artificial gravity that kept shifting as the station's systems struggled to maintain basic functions. Amy was monitoring the facility's power readings on her scanner, watching helplessly as critical systems failed throughout the massive structure. They had perhaps 2 hours before the station would begin breaking apart, taking everyone aboard with it into the planet's atmosphere below. Lisa found a window that looked out into space and saw their final opponents preparing for battle in the station's central hub. The apex predators were exactly what their name suggested, a species that had been genetically engineered for combat over thousands of generations, until they represented the perfect fusion of intelligence and killing ability. Their bodies were living weapons, enhanced with technology that made them faster and stronger than any natural creature. The second team was harder to see clearly, their forms seeming to shift and change as probability itself bent around them. The Quantum Weavers were beings who had learned to manipulate chance and possibility, making unlikely events happen through sheer force of will. They could make enemy weapons malfunction at crucial moments, cause structural failures to happen exactly when needed, and ensure that their own attacks would find their targets. No matter how impossible the shot might seem, Jake studied the station's layout through Amy's scanner readings, looking for advantages they could use against opponents who were superior to humans in almost every measurable way. The apex predators had reflexes that could respond to threats in microseconds, while the quantum weavers could alter the laws of physics themselves to ensure victory. Against such enemies, conventional tactics would be worse than useless, but the station itself was providing opportunities that Jake's tactical mind was beginning to recognize. The failing systems were creating unpredictable hazards throughout the structure, with gravity fields that shifted without warning and energy discharges that could occur anywhere at any time. Most species would see these as obstacles to be avoided, but humans had learned long ago that chaos could be a weapon if properly utilized. Ryan was placing his remaining explosive charges at key structural points throughout the station, his engineering knowledge allowing him to predict how the facility would fail and where the greatest damage could be accomplished with minimal resources. His leg wound was slowing him down, but his mind was still sharp, and he understood better than anyone how to turn a collapsing building into a battlefield advantage. Amy had connected her medical scanner to the station's sensor network, giving her access to information about every system and corridor in the massive structure. She could track their enemies' movements while also monitoring the facility's deteriorating condition, providing Jake with tactical intelligence that no other team possessed. Her knowledge of biology was also helping her understand the apex predators' genetic enhancements and how they might be countered. The first engagement occurred in the station's main corridor, where the artificial gravity was fluctuating between 0 and 3 times Earth normal in unpredictable cycles. The apex predators attacked with coordinated precision, their enhanced bodies moving with speed that made them appear as blurs of motion. But Jake had anticipated their approach, and Ryan's explosives brought down a section of the corridor ceiling. At exactly the moment when the gravity field was at maximum strength, the debris fell with crushing force that would have pulverized normal beings. But the apex predators' enhanced bones and muscles allowed them to survive impacts that should have been fatal. However, they were trapped under tons of wreckage, giving Lisa time to line up shots with her modified rifle. Her bullets were designed to penetrate their enhanced armor, and her marksmanship training allowed her to target the weak points in their genetic perfection. The quantum weavers attacked from an unexpected angle, using their probability manipulation to cause a massive power surge that should have electrocuted the entire human team. But Amy had been monitoring the station's electrical systems, and she redirected the energy discharge through conductors that carried it safely around their position. The aliens' ability to alter probability was powerful, but it couldn't overcome superior preparation and technical knowledge. Jake led his team through the station's maze of corridors and chambers, using every failing system and structural weakness to their advantage. When the apex predators tried to corner them in a maintenance bay, Ryan's explosives caused a hull breach that created a localized tornado of escaping atmosphere. The enhanced aliens were sucked toward the breach by forces they couldn't resist, while the humans had prepared for the decompression by securing themselves to the station's structure. The battle moved through the station like a three-dimensional war, with both enemy teams trying to use their superior abilities to overwhelm the humans through direct confrontation. But Jake's strategy was based on avoiding direct fights whenever possible, instead using the environment itself as a weapon against opponents who were accustomed to winning through individual superiority. Amy discovered that the station's failing systems were actually creating opportunities for technical solutions that wouldn't normally be possible. She was able to overload power conduits in specific areas, creating electromagnetic pulses that disrupted the apex predators' enhanced nervous systems. She also found ways to interfere with the quantum fields that the weavers used to manipulate probability, limiting their reality-altering abilities to small areas around their own bodies. Lisa's sniper position in the station's observation deck gave her clear shots at targets throughout the central hub, but she had to account for gravity fields that changed constantly and atmospheric conditions that could alter her bullets' trajectories in unpredictable ways. Her human intuition and years of training allowed her to make shots that defied the laws of physics, hitting targets that probability itself said should be impossible to reach. The final confrontation occurred as the station began its death spiral. Toward the planet below, the entire structure groaning and shaking as competing forces tore it apart. The remaining apex predators and quantum weavers had joined forces in a desperate attempt to eliminate the human team before the facility's destruction killed them all. Jake realized that they had one chance to win, but it would require perfect timing and absolute trust in each other's abilities. As the station entered the planet's atmosphere and began to burn, he gave the signal for their final gambit. Ryan's explosive severed the connections holding the central hub to the rest of the station, while Amy redirected all remaining power to the emergency systems that would keep their section intact during atmospheric entry. Lisa made a shot that should have been impossible, her bullet traveling through multiple gravity fields and electromagnetic disturbances to strike the lead apex predator at the exact moment when its enhanced reflexes were overwhelmed by competing sensory inputs. The creature fell just as the station's hull began to glow with re-entry heat, its genetically perfect body unable to adapt to conditions that no amount of evolution could have prepared it for. The quantum weavers tried to use their probability manipulation to ensure their own survival, but the chaotic forces of a station breaking apart in atmospheric entry created too many variables for even their reality-altering abilities to control. They were consumed by forces that existed outside the normal laws of physics, destroyed by the same chaos they had tried to master. The emergency pod's heat shields glowed white-hot as it plunged through the planet's atmosphere, carrying Jake's team toward what should have been certain death. The space station was breaking apart around them, its massive sections tumbling through the sky like burning meteors while the pod's primitive systems struggled to keep them alive. Amy worked frantically with the life support controls, her medical knowledge helping her understand how much stress the human body could endure during emergency re-entry. Jake watched through the pod's small window as pieces of the station crashed into the desert below, creating explosions that lit up the planet's surface like a chain of artificial suns. Somewhere in that chaos, their final opponents were also falling toward the ground, and whoever survived the crash would have to face them in one last battle to determine the tournament's champion. Lisa was unconscious from the G-forces of their descent, her body unable to handle the extreme acceleration despite her excellent physical condition. Ryan's leg wound had reopened during the violent ride, and he was losing blood that they couldn't afford to lose. But Amy had managed to keep them all alive through the worst part of the re-entry, and the pod's parachutes were deploying automatically. As they approached the planet's surface, the pod hit the ground hard, bouncing twice before coming to rest in a crater of its own making. Jake was the first to recover, his military training helping him shake off the effects of the crash faster than his teammates. Through the pod's cracked windows, he could see that they had landed near the ruins of what had once been a city, its ancient buildings now serving as the arena for the tournament's final battle. Amy helped Lisa regain consciousness while Jake assessed their situation. Their weapons and equipment had survived the crash, but they were running low on ammunition and medical supplies. Ryan could still walk, but his injury would slow them down if they had to move quickly. Worst of all, they had no idea where their enemies had landed, or what condition they were in after surviving the same hellish descent. The tournament's energy barrier had been destroyed along with the space station, but the rules were simple enough that no technology was needed to enforce them. Only one team could leave this planet alive, and the galactic audience would know who won when the rescue ships arrived to collect the survivors. It was the oldest form of competition in the universe, reduced to its most basic elements. Jake led his team out of the crashed pod and into the ruins of the ancient city, using every piece of cover they could find while searching for signs of their opponents. The buildings were made from the same black stone as the temple they had explored earlier, but these structures had been damaged by time and weather until they were barely more than foundations and broken walls. Through the ruins came a sound that Jake recognized immediately, the distinctive hum of energy weapons charging up for combat. The apex predators had survived the crash, and they were preparing for one final assault that would either make them champions or destroy them completely. Their genetically enhanced bodies had allowed them to recover from injuries that would have killed normal beings, and their weapons were still functioning despite the violent descent from orbit. Lisa found a sniper position among the ruined buildings. Her rifle trained on the area where the energy weapon sounds were coming from. But Jake knew that conventional tactics wouldn't work against opponents who had survived everything the tournament could throw at them. The apex predators were wounded and desperate, which made them more dangerous than they had ever been before. Amy was monitoring her scanner for any sign of the quantum weavers, but the readings were chaotic and unclear. The reality-manipulating aliens might have been destroyed during the station's collapse, or they might be using their probability-altering abilities to hide from detection. Until they knew for certain, Jake's team would have to assume that both enemy groups were still active and dangerous. The attack came from 3 directions simultaneously, with the surviving apex predators using their enhanced speed and coordination to assault the humans' position with overwhelming force. Their energy weapons lit up the ruins with deadly light, while their enhanced bodies moved with speed that made them almost impossible to target accurately. But Jake had learned something important during the tournament's previous battles. Every species they had faced, no matter how advanced or enhanced, had relied on abilities that made them predictable in certain ways. The apex predators were perfect killing machines, but that perfection made them follow patterns that a clever tactician could anticipate and counter. Ryan's explosives brought down sections of the ancient buildings at precisely the moments when the aliens' enhanced reflexes would drive them toward specific escape routes. Lisa's shots were timed to intercept targets at the exact locations where their genetic programming would force them to be. Amy used her medical knowledge to target the specific enhanced organs that kept the creatures functioning at superhuman levels. The battle raged through the ruins for what felt like hours, with both sides using every advantage they could find. The apex predators' enhanced abilities allowed them to survive injuries that would have killed any other species, but the humans' adaptability and tactical coordination eventually began to wear them down. Jake's team fought like a single organism, with 4 specialized functions, each member contributing their unique skills to the overall strategy. The final apex predator made its last stand among the ruins of what had once been a temple, its energy weapon blazing with power as it prepared to take at least one human with it into death. But Lisa's shot took the creature through the brain before it could fire. Her bullet finding the one spot where its enhanced skull was vulnerable to conventional weapons. As the alien's body fell to the ground, Jake realized that something was wrong. The silence that followed the battle was too complete, too perfect. The probability of everything going exactly right for the humans was so small that it suggested outside interference. And that could only mean one thing. The last quantum weaver emerged from behind a ruined wall, its form shimmering with the energy of manipulated probability fields. It had been using its reality-altering abilities to ensure that the humans would win their battle against the apex predators, sacrificing its allies to set up a final confrontation that it was certain to win. But Amy had been studying the quantum readings throughout the battle, and she had discovered something important about how the aliens' probability manipulation actually worked. They could alter chance and possibility, but they couldn't create outcomes that were truly impossible. They could make unlikely events happen, but they couldn't violate the fundamental laws of physics or logic. Jake realized that the quantum weaver had made a crucial mistake by allowing the humans to eliminate the apex predators. It had gained the advantage of choosing when and where the final battle would occur, but it had also limited its own options by reducing the conflict to a simple one-on-one confrontation between species with very different abilities. The alien began altering probability fields around Jake's team, causing their weapons to malfunction and their equipment to fail at crucial moments. But humans had been dealing with equipment failures and bad luck for thousands of years, and they had learned to adapt and overcome when technology couldn't be trusted. Jake threw aside his malfunctioning rifle and charged the quantum weaver with Nothing but a combat knife and the determination that had carried his species through every challenge they had ever faced. The alien tried to manipulate probability to ensure that his attack would fail, but there were too many variables in close combat for even its reality-altering abilities to control completely. Amy and Lisa provided covering fire with backup weapons that the alien hadn't had time to sabotage, while Ryan used his last explosive charge to collapse the ruins around the Quantum Weaver's position. The alien found itself trapped in a situation where probability manipulation couldn't overcome simple physics and human determination. Jake's knife found its target just as the creature tried to phase into a different quantum state, the blade, striking at the exact moment when the alien was forced to exist in normal reality. The Quantum Weaver's scream echoed across dimensions that human ears couldn't hear, and then it collapsed into a pool of energy that gradually faded into nothing. The ruins fell silent except for the sound of wind blowing through the broken stones and the distant rumble of rescue ships entering the planet's atmosphere. Jake helped his wounded teammates to their feet, looking around at the battlefield where they had achieved something that every expert in the galaxy had said was impossible. Amy was treating Ryan's injuries with the last of their medical supplies while Lisa counted their remaining ammunition. They had won the tournament through tactics and determination rather than superior technology or genetic enhancement, proving that the human way of fighting could overcome any opponent if properly applied. The rescue ships landed among the ruins, their crews consisting of aliens from dozens of different species who stared at the human survivors with expressions of shock and disbelief. The galactic commentators were struggling to explain to billions of viewers how a primitive species had defeated opponents who were theoretically superior in every way. Jake realized that their victory was about more